Hey, good people, it's Davin, and I'm back for another episode of the Free Your Voice, Free Your Life podcast. I'm coming to you from downtown Chicago where it is cold AF. It is so cold. My studio is across the street, essentially, from where I live. And it's quite a humorous scene to see all of the clothes that I have to put on to walk across the street, only to disrobe and then get in this cozy little studio space to record this podcast for you. But this is just one of those days. It's peak January situation, and I'm grateful to be able to have this reason to cozy in and chat with you. I'm actually just returning from a place that was even a little bit colder, Omaha, Nebraska. And I just had the most magical time in Omaha. I was bringing the Reset, my signature immersive sound healing experience, to a venue called Steelhouse Omaha, which is a really new space. It's a little over a year old, and is a part of the Omaha Performing Arts portfolio of venues. But I gotta say, this venue is next level. Like, they have really done an amazing job crafting a lovely experience for both the performer and the audience member. And Omaha turned out like in a way that was really so satisfying and felt so good. And I'm just so grateful. I never know when I go to these cities. I mean, all this is new for me, especially with this sort of new performance type that I'm even bringing to the market. I never know for sure if people are going to show up. I don't know whether it's going to resonate in certain communities. And I'm continually surprised by where and how and with whom it all connects. But I did 2 shows, and we had almost 600 people at the 2 shows, and I was just really blown away by the love and the affection and the reciprocity of the experience. And I met multiple people who came because they listened to this podcast, and that really, really blew my mind. And I just wanna say, if you're listening now, I'm so grateful. That really, I told you in person if you said to me, but I really want you to know it means a lot to me. And yeah, just really thankful for the hugs and for the love and for the reception of the Reset. It is a joy to be able to keep down this path of curiosity and exploration and experimentation. And I keep getting better at what I do and I keep learning new things. And yeah, just a lot of gratitude in my heart for that. So thanks, Omaha. This weekend, I'm going to be in Boston. So if you listen to the podcast and you are based in Boston or you know folks who are, I hope you will send them my direction. They can find out more at theresetsoundexperience.com, theresetsoundexperience.com. I'm going to be at the Huntington, which is a really beautiful historic theater in Boston. And yeah, I'm just excited to see what unfolds there. And then in March, I will be at Louisville, part of the Kentucky Center for the Performing Arts. And then also, I will be in Philadelphia at the Kimmel Center. So I'm hoping to see you or people you know in those places. And just thanks, y'all, for the love and support. I'm also excited because in February, I'm going to be going to Tucson, Arizona with a company called the Nimble Group that hosts human resources conferences. And I'm going to be bringing Voxus, my improvisational singing work that I do with corporate groups there. And so it'll be great to get a little bit of sun, maybe a little bit warmer temps, and also just to do that work too and bring that to my corporate people who want to utilize singing as a means toward personal growth and transformation and healing, which is sort of the origin of this podcast. I recognize that my themes have stepped further away from singing specifically. And I want you to know that I have some awkwardness around that. But I also feel really compelled to lean into sharing with you the things that are on my heart. And my work has really always centered the voice, has centered singing, has centered our voice as a tool for personal growth, for healing, for transformation, for change. And that is still very central to my own journey. But I also recognize that in talking about that, I'm always touching on bigger ideas, some bigger themes. And I want to continue to lean into the ones that feel most relevant and most resonant for me and the people I'm coaching and coming in communication with now. The idea for this podcast or the idea for this work really came from two places. One, my own personal journey of growth and healing with my voice, but also this inevitable correspondence I saw with folks that were willing to lean into their voice, their expression of themselves, their creativity, their singing, and how that always corresponded or correlated with the change that they would be willing to make in their lives. I was listening to this teacher today, and this really sort of resonated with me. And she was specifically talking about psychedelics. And she was saying how she had an experience with psychedelics that really alerted her to a more expansive understanding of herself. She said, but once the experience was over, she was still exactly who she was. She just caught a glimpse of something outside of her sort of small understanding. And I believe that singing and creativity and self expression, they do the exact same thing. They do the exact same thing. They allow you to have access to a glimpse of yourself that feels more expansive, that feels bigger, that feels more aligned than the narrow understanding of ourselves that we carry around our day to day, which says, I'm do this, I am this, I'm like this is how I behave, this is who I am. I just got off a coaching call where someone said to me, do you think someone at 43 years old can change how they breathe? And I said, "Yeah." I do. But but you have to be willing to catch a glimpse of yourself that's bigger than being someone who's 43 and stuck in a way of breathing. You have to be willing to dance in the risk and the vulnerability of your ego, the story of yourself not being the total story of who you are. Because the story of who you are, it's so much bigger. It's so much dreamier. It's so much more hopeful. It's so much more optimistic. And this is really what I want to talk to you about today in this podcast. I titled this podcast, The Courage of Creativity. The Courage of Creativity. But I have a number of different alternative titles that would have worked really well. And the first one I was thinking is, your job is to be creative. I don't care who you are, your job is to be creative. Or another title that could be synonymous with the courage of creativity is the courage of being yourself, or the courage to be yourself. The reason this feels so important right now is because we live in a time, we live in an age, we live in a culture, and we live with the conditioning that there are a lot of threats. And this is so important to recognize. Some of these threats are very real. Some of these threats are significant and can have significant impact on our lives or people's lives who we love. But some of the threats, the seeming threats, are simply stories that we're consuming. Stories on social media, stories that are told by loved ones, stories that are told by complete strangers that say, you better look out because you're not safe. And the reason I start this conversation here is because it is very difficult to be a creative person when it feels like you are under threat, when it feels like life is going to be too much, or it feels like the only thing worth doing right now is protecting or even resisting. See, your ability to actually create, to be creative, is contingent upon your sense, your felt sense of safety, first and foremost within your body. But let me back up even further. Why would I bring this up to you to begin with? Well, first, I believe your job is to create. Actually, I believe that your life's purpose is to be creative. I believe that you came here to create. And you might have a story about yourself that you're not a creative person, or that you've lost track of your creativity, or you've tried to be creative, but it doesn't really pan out for you, or it's not worth it to lean into creativity because you can't make money doing that, or you're only mediocre at it and you have to be really good for it to be worthwhile, or it's going to take too long to learn that, or it's going to cost too much for this, or it's too late. Do any of those stories sound familiar? Because I've thought a lot of those things too. But I really believe in my fundamental knowing, in my deepest sense of being, that to be a human is to have come forth to create, to be creative. We see this all around us. We see the human urge, the human desire to make things new, to make things refreshed, to make things grow. We see the human desire to evolve. And evolution requires creation and creativity. And regardless of whether or not you find yourself to be an active participant, you are a part of this all. You're a part of the universe, constant new creation. Now, we see this in simply the cells of your body, which are constantly changing. In fact, every 7 years, you may have heard this before because it's true. Every 7 years, your actual physical being is not what it was prior. And that is because there's new creation constantly happening within this meat sack that you're traveling around in. You are constantly shifting and changing and growing. So, to begin with, might I offer that you just consider this proposal that I have, that you, by your very being, by the nature of your being, by showing up on planet Earth, agreed that you were ready to create, that you were a part of the system, you were a part of this universal structure that is constantly creative. And your job going forward is simply to acknowledge that as true. Acknowledge that as true. Acknowledge that as true. You don't even have to believe it. You don't have to believe me. But if you could practice the consideration of this is true, I wonder what you might discover about yourself. See, here's the thing about creation and creativity. It's sort of a mystery. Like, yeah, we know processes, but where does the origin of an idea come from? What is the origin of your thoughts or your thinking or your voice for expression? What is the origin of that idea that came to you in the shower? Or the origin of that dream, that plan that manifested in your mind when you were riding on the train, or when you're driving down the road, or when you're out for a walk? Where does that come from? It's a mystery. If anyone has a sound, secure answer, don't believe them because we don't know. There's sort of this mystery of beginnings. Even if we think about any of sort of the great mythological traditions or even the scientific tradition of the Big Bang Theory and how the world began, the only thing we know is that it's always reflected that it began with sound. It began with a noise. But what was the impetus? What was the energy? What was the thing that propelled the sound forward? We don't know. It's mysterious. And the reason I want you to understand this to begin with is if you try to rationalize this in your mind, you will potentially lose access to the possibility of stepping into the mystery of creativity. This is also important because all of those things that I said earlier, the reasons you would deny yourself the opportunity to be a creative person, to create, is because you would have tried to rationalize a process that needs no rationality, a process that is as mysterious as your life on this earth, a process that is as mysterious as every breath that you take, a process that is as special and as magical as all of the great traditions of understanding. This is your birthright, this is your origin, and this is who you are. But when rationality wants to creep in, when we start to tell really solid stories about, I'm this person that does this, I have this much in terms of resources, I have this much in terms of time, when we really get locked in to those, we will quickly talk ourselves out of enjoying the magic of creativity. We will think it's not worthwhile, it doesn't make enough money. We will think it's not worthwhile, people won't like it. We will think it's not worthwhile because I'm too scared to share it. You name it. Those are all of the reasons that will come up quickly. But there's a more joyful path, and it's a very courageous path to travel down. And it's a path of beginning with curiosity. It's a path of having the bravery and the courage to see what shows up, despite the many reasons to be afraid, despite the many fears that might present themselves. And we're going to talk more about that in a minute, the courageous part. But I want to go back to what I said earlier about safety. Here's the thing. There are inevitably stories in your life. There are inevitably experiences in your life where you caught a glimpse of yourself or someone gave you a story that caused you to believe that you wouldn't be safe if you put yourself out there like that. This is why I always like to have people reflect on themselves as a child, particularly when it comes to singing, because most kids, most kids have quite a freedom with their self-expression when they're really young. And the only reason for that could be that no one has told them yet to be scared of it. They didn't know to be scared. But then when that fear starts to be conditioned into our understanding, don't do that, you'll embarrass yourself, that's not worth your time, you look silly doing that, people are going to make fun of you, you might get cast out, it doesn't have real value in this economy, in this world. When you don't know to worry about those things, there's a sort of freedom and a playfulness and a curiosity and an exploration that just shows up. But as soon as someone told you you shouldn't sing like that, as soon as someone told you it's not worth your time, there's a good chance that you went quiet. And that had everything to do with your lack of felt sense of safety. Now, this lack of felt sense of safety, it always begins in the body. It's an experience in the body, which is why singing and the voice are so relevant in terms of discussing this, because singing is of the body. And so when we explore fear within the body, its relationship to singing is potentially very identifiable. But it's true regarding anything. If you're a painter, picking up that brush. If you're a theater person, learning that monologue. If you're a jazz artist, playing your saxophone. All of those things can get tied into that sort of fearful, and I'll go back to rational thinking around what is safe for you to do, what has worth, what has value, what will potentially keep you in your community, or what has the potential for getting you kicked out, not accepted. I can't erase that fear for you. There are a lot of practices, and I'd really encourage you to do some research in polyvagal theory, nervous system regulation. Deb Dana's book, Anchored, is a great place to start. I'm really excited about the new Martha Beck book, which is called Beyond Anxiety. I've heard some interviews and I purchased the book and excited to get reading that. I think there's some great tools in that. But what I want you to know is that your fear about the thing is not the actual fear that you need to confront. So, your fear around singing or your fear around pursuing poetry as a career. I mean, could you imagine anything crazier than poetry as a career? That might be exactly why it's worthwhile. But your fear around pursuing these different aspects of your creative self is not about doing the actual thing. It's about your fear of not being able to survive. It runs much deeper. And it's really important for you to know that because if you don't identify this sort of origin story of your sense of not being able to survive, you'll ascribe that story to the thing and it gets quickly attached to the thing. But it's not the thing. The thing is simply an expression of your creativity. That thing can only happen well and freely when you start to ask yourself, what is the fear? Where does the fear come from? What is its origin story? And then from there, we have to simply ask, is it true? Is it true? Is it true? And then when you do that, engaging exercises that help cultivate a felt sense of safety within the body. If you find that more often, it starts incrementally, it's not a magic wand, you don't wave it, but incrementally over time, I promise you that you will find yourself more freely engaging creativity. But if you stay in this fear response space, if you stay under threat, if you aren't able to get yourself out of some of those old stories, some of those old narratives, you will constantly come up with reasons that you're not creative or that you can't be creative or that that's not a dream that you can pursue. So often I see people putting things off because they feel like there are a certain number of pieces that they need to get in place. And a lot of times they'll um, attribute it to having to learn more or get more certification or you name it, some sort of like external source that would provide legitimacy. But more often than not, this is about looking at the direct aspects of your life that are causing you to respond from a place of threat. Sometimes this can be the relationships that are closest to us, or our jobs, or our environment where we live. And I'm not saying that you can, like, drop all those things and it's all fixed. Not saying that at all. But sometimes you pursuing yourself. Remember, I said that an alternative title to this episode is The Courage to Be Yourself. The way that you might need to actually get the momentum to pursue that, to get the courage to pursue that, is to create space between you and the inhibiting factors, like maybe some of the people who are in your life who have not been able to encourage you down this path. In fact, have offered veiled threats or have simply retold stories that it's not smart. It doesn't make sense. It's not a good idea. I have to tell you, I'm very conscious of this now in my life, maybe more so than ever, because I'm traveling down a path that, I mean, it's certainly new to me, but it's really new to a lot of others. And I catch an awareness in conversation often with certain folks that meet me with the energy of, well, I could never do that, or good luck on that working out for you. And I just get an ick factor really fast with that. I have compassion for their posture and their position because I've been there myself, but I'm not playing by those rules anymore. And so when I'm around folks who sort of perpetuate the smallest understandings around what's possible for their life in projecting it upon me, I exit pretty quickly. It's not a conversation that I find useful to engage. It actually feels hurtful and detrimental and unnecessary. So I'll often find myself in certain company At the very least, changing the subject, because that is not the way in which I can cultivate this sense of safety within my body. This isn't the space from which I can stay in my courage. And it's certainly not the type of energy I want to continue to move forth on this path toward being my authentic, aligned self. Sometimes jobs, we give them extra value and extra worth. We allow them to define us. And I think that this is a really big pitfall for a lot of folks. Now, I've said before that it's my experience, particularly with voice coaching, that a lot of times when people start singing, I find that suddenly they'll tell me they're changing jobs, or they're quitting their job, or they're leaving a relationship, or they're making some significant change. And I want to be abundantly clear that it's not my intention here to encourage you to do any of those things. But I do see that if you identify with a job and you're spending X amount of hours there, it is going to be difficult to find the spaciousness to expand your identity. Now, it's not saying that that's inherently bad. I'm just saying it's an easy pitfall. I've been reading, I just finished Gay Hendricks' The Big Leap, which I would also recommend if you haven't checked out. But one of the ideas that Gay Hendricks proposes is that each of us has a zone of incompetence, a zone of competence, a zone of excellence, and a zone of genius. And the book is really geared toward helping you move toward your zone of genius, or even like cultivating the belief that you could live in your zone of genius. But what happens to so many of us, particularly in jobs, is we become excellent at them. And what Gay says, which I think is so profound, is that most of us get stuck in our zone of excellence. And in your zone of excellence, where you're pretty good at something, and people respect you, and they think you know a lot, and you have a lot of answers, you can find yourself quite miserable because something within you, something deep within you, knows that it's not your zone of genius. It's not your zone of genius. My friend, your zone of genius is always creativity. Now, it's easy to hear me say that and think I'm talking about painting, dancing, acting, drawing, sewing, and yes, all of those things. But I'm also talking about the way in which you can see your life, the creative vision you have for yourself for the future, the creative vision you have for yourself for the future. Part of what you were put on this earth to create is the most excellent life possible for yourself. Part of what you were put here to do is live better, more fully, with more knowledge and understanding than your ancestors were able to live. Part of what you were put here to do is to live so abundantly and so well that the people around you who haven't been able to find that for themselves have no choice but to be inspired by who you are. What if that's why you're here? What if you painting joyfully? What if you singing wholeheartedly was your zone of genius and also your primary act of service? What if it was a thing that you could offer to inspire the people you love the most? Why would you hold back from doing that? Why wouldn't you put the pieces in place to live a life that felt more aligned, that felt more authentic, that felt more true, that felt more like you? Now, again, I want to say, I know this is not easy, and this isn't a switch that we flip. But you may recall from previous episodes that I also believe that this is the next step for you. It's as easy as taking the next step. It's doing the next thing. It's not looking for the biggest, most crazy jump. It's incremental shifts and changes over time. It's standing on the medium platform, ready to jump in the pool before someday you go up to the high dive. It's riding that bike for the first time without training wheels, even though you don't feel you're ready, and feeling super wobbly, but simultaneously feeling so free. One of the words that I find myself using a lot that I really love is the word alignment, to be in alignment. And I say that because in this season of my life, I'm experiencing that sense of alignment in a way that I never have before. I say that not to brag, but I just know that there's this increase of possibility for all of us when we really take the courageous steps to create, to then just feel in alignment or flow. And I know that you know this feeling because I know that even if it's been a long time, you've engaged in activities, you've done things where you lost track of time, where you weren't worried about how you looked, where you lost track of a sense of how you sounded, where you weren't gauging for safety, where you weren't gauging everyone else for affirmation. You were finding it within yourself. You were finding it within your participation in this activity. And so that is alignment. That is flow. That is a space or a place that I promise you can live more often. But you have to have that first courageous step to, first of all, inquire, get curious about the perceived threats from your past or from your current situation. And then take the next right step. And in doing so, discovering or rediscovering your creativity. Or in essence, rediscovering who you are. One of my favorite Martha Beck exercises is a simple exercise, but it's very difficult, especially if you haven't done it before. It's simply to imagine your perfect day. Just imagine your perfect day. Just imagine where you're waking up and who you're with and what you're wearing or not wearing. It's imagining the temperature. It's imagining what you ate. It's imagining if anything's on your calendar or not. It's imagining what you do. What do you do? Or what don't you do? And in this exercise, you're also noticing, what does this feel like? I mean, even right now, as I'm saying this to you, I feel my heart softening. I feel everything sort of getting easier. This practice, and you really got to go through, you have to go through the whole day. You can't just do breakfast. You got to go through the whole day. And then maybe you do it again tomorrow and the next day. And maybe tomorrow, the perfect day is totally different. You're with someone totally else, different. It's okay. But it's starting to rewire your mind to step outside of the story of fear and scarcity, the story of limitation and lack, the rational thinking that for so long has kept you stuck at the job you've been at or in the relationship that feels fundamentally wrong or not setting boundaries with the people that seem to constantly be interrupting your path of goodness. Or just having the courage to set up a schedule for yourself that feels like a day that you want. See, part of imagining your perfect day, envisioning your perfect day, is so that you can create it. It's very difficult to create something that you haven't thought of before. You have to first have the thought, and that's where the creation comes from. And that's what I said you're here to do. In fact, that's what is happening. You're already creating your days. You are already creating this life. You have meticulously created so many aspects of what it is to be you. And some of those you like, and some of those you really can't stand. But I just want to offer that you have the capacity to create any life for yourself if you have